even the very earliest of enterprises, from pyramid building to canal digging, would have needed some form of internal communication. But our discipline gets going in earnest with the birth of the Industrial Revolution. In 1840, female workers at textile mills in Massachusetts start writing one of the very first in-house newsletters, the Lowell Offering, a very early example of user-generated content. Let's jump forward to 1924. This is the Hawthorne Works in Illinois, Chicago, owned by the Western Electric Company. It's the setting for the Hawthorne Experiments, a groundbreaking study into worker productivity. Researchers created 2 study groups of female employees and made a series of changes to their working conditions. Their productivity increased when the lighting was improved, but bizarrely, it also improved when the lighting was dimmed. In fact, whatever the researchers changed, the opposite had the same effect. In swept psychologist Elton Mayo with an extraordinary explanation. These women were working more productively simply because they were actively discussing their work with researchers and their managers, who in turn were showing genuine interest in them. The Hawthorne Experiments proved fulfilling employees' psychological needs was as important as the right financial incentives and working conditions. Fast forward to 1943, and another psychologist, Abraham Maslow, publishes A Theory of Human Motivation. Maslow sets out 5 levels of human needs. As we satisfy one need, we feel able to move on to the next. Now, Maslow has his critics, but his theory profoundly shapes our thinking about what drives and motivates employees, and it becomes an iconic pyramid used in trillions of PowerPoint presentations the world over. Our first professional body was formed in 1949, the British Association of Industrial Editors. The founders said that too many in-house journals were cheerfully amateur. The association's mission was to raise their editorial standards. The body is renamed several times as its mission becomes broader. It becomes Communicators in Business, and more recently, the Institute of Internal Communication. In 1964, a newspaper publisher leaves his job on Fleet Street to set up one of the world's first agencies devoted to helping companies with their employee communication. Anthony Buckley names the agency AB. He rents a desk and a telephone line in an office above Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club in Soho. Tony says later, "I felt faceless corporate announcements were detrimental to the morale of employees." Across the Atlantic, Roger Dupree is feeling the same way. He is managing employee comms at the Xerox Corporation. He goes on to write 10 books on humanising corporations and their communication, and in doing so, Roger lays the foundation for our modern discipline. In 1982, one of the most influential business books of the 20th century is published. In Search of Excellence profiled well-known corporations achieving extraordinary success through a people-centric management approach. The magic formula that successful businesses have discovered, said Tom Peters, is to treat customers like guests and employees like people. In the late 1970s, however, industrial relations in the UK takes a turn for the worst. The winter of discontent sparks widespread strikes, and this is followed in 1984 by a long-running and bitter miners' strike. In a groundbreaking move, the editor of Coal News, the miners' in-house newspaper, persuades the chairman of British Coal to devote an entire section of the newspaper to employees giving their views on the conflict. Our mainly print-based channels are about to receive a huge shake-up when, in 1989, Tim Berners-Lee invents the World Wide Web. And a few years later, in 1993, Microsoft releases the very first version of Outlook. Meanwhile, William Kahn, Professor of Organisational Behaviour, writes a hugely influential article called Psychological Conditions of Personal Engagement and Disengagement, which he publishes in 1990. Kahn said later, "The engagement concept was developed based on the premise that individuals can make real choices about how much of their real personal selves they reveal and express in their work. That premise was radically different from the operating assumptions of the time. The concept of employee engagement takes hold. 9 years later, Gallup publishes First Break All the Rules, which introduces the Q12, its engagement survey. Pretty soon, measuring engagement becomes big business. In 2009, Engage for Success identifies 4 enablers for engagement: a strong strategic narrative, engaging managers, employee voice, and organisational integrity. Apple launches the first iPhone in 2007, and the decade that follows sees an IT revolution. Within 10 years, employees are spending a third of their time reading and responding to email and scrolling through 300 feet of mobile content every day. That's the equivalent to the height of the Statue of Liberty. Facebook enters the IC space in 2016 with Workplace, its internal social networking tool, which is not short of competitors. Surveys now show the biggest barrier to internal communication success is excessive levels of noise inside our organisations. 2020 brings an unprecedented event, the global pandemic. In March, the Edelman Trust Barometer finds my employer is the most trusted source of credible information about COVID-19. More trusted than the media, governments, and even NGOs. Not only is there a demand for company information, many are saying the current crisis is humanising organisations and, in turn, workplace communication. Our discipline has a long, rich history and, it would seem, an equally rich and fascinating future.